Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be with you today on the stage and discuss with you what we've been doing for the last year. So, as my talk will be about Sylius and API platform integration, I will start with pretty simple warm-up question. So, my question to you is, have you ever heard about this project? Please raise your hand. Okay, most of you at least play with me. So I assume that have you ever tried or used it? That also helps me a lot. So because my talk will be focused mostly about the integration between Sylius and API platform, and therefore I will focus on the API platform bits. No, I will not speak too much about the tax calculation, etc., but rather how we connect both projects together. So, like, you can probably feel the following question. Have you ever heard about this project? Okay. And last one, have you used it? Okay. There is some, of course, which is obvious. Not all of you heard about it and not all of you use it. But as we were integrating both projects for the last year, we had a couple of findings that I would like to share with you today. And perhaps it will help you to structurize or just plan your application better. Or at least it will trigger some conversation that we can have either during the questions or just after the conversation or after my talk. So just a little small stuff that I would like to present to you before. When I mention application or infrastructure, I mean mostly the hexagonal architecture. So infrastructure is what API platform is doing, so handling the request, and application is mostly what Sylius is doing, so the internal calculation logic. And I will cover 3 topics: application, architecture, API design, and testing. And this will be more or less the idea for today's presentation. But before I will jump to the first topic, let's take a look what we would like to achieve with this integration at all. First of all, our main goal was to create a modern API for e-commerce. And to be precise, as you could read in the description of this talk, we wanted to develop a new quality in headless words. So just create something that will actually bring joy to people that will work with it, both as backend developers and frontend developers. Of course, we wanted to be closer to the Symfony, as this is API platform is so close to Symfony that it was our obvious choice. And we also wanted to have always up-to-date documentation that will follow what we are requesting. So having it explicitly written what you should send to us is really crucial, because usually people forget about documentation. And even though API platform usually generates the API reference, it's still much better than to not have anything. It doesn't cover all the cases, but it's a super nice feature that we also wanted to have. But let's take a look into application itself and the application architecture. So the question that we had was how to preserve the usage easiness of API platform, yet combine it with Sylius flexibility. So first, we of course had to ask the question how to handle typical operations like create, read, update, and delete. And of course with the CRUD, which is like the straightforward implementation of API platform. In this case, you have something that is super easy to set up, super easy to use, and super easy to extend, because if you need a new resource, you can just put a new resource in with the API platform resource reference, and you're done. With Sylius, if you just add something to the class that you have with your Sylius standard, you just expose it to the customer. So it's super simple to use. Of course, it's also familiar to most of the developers. This is how a lot of applications are structured. The rest is like by default pretty CRUD oriented. So it's familiar for all of us. How it looks like, I probably do not need to remind you that it's just 2 attributes that you put on the top of your class and you are done with your CRUD. Probably I would be able to finish like 80% of the cases that Sylius has just with this 2 annotation. Probably a little bit more of the configuration, some flavor of serialization, and we are done. However, there are some small cons of it, and it's not the issue of API platform or anything, but it's just how the CRUD is structured. And this is, it's harder to bend CRUD to business expectation, especially a little bit more sophisticated, or if you have some side effects, etc. Of course, you may do it with data persisters, but it doesn't solve all the problems. So for the question, how can we do it, is of course commands. So today Antoine mentioned to you that one of the first workshops that we had was that you could provide different input and output data, and this is what we heavily use in the Sylius integration. Because commands and actually command pattern is super flexible, it's because you are decoupling how the data came to you from where with the implementation itself. Handlers, therefore, are somehow the controllers of the whole behavior. Not the controllers in terms of Symfony, but the controllers of the behavior where you have like the input that you wanted to have, and you can do whatever you want. Also, it gives you the possibility to defer execution. So with the Symfony Messenger integration, it's super easy to put the message into the doctrine and execute it just a few seconds later, perhaps increase the amount of workers, etc., which is, from the framework perspective, super important to not use it by default, but to give you the possibility to use something like that if you will need, because you have just you expect so many hits to your server that you would like to defer some part of the calculation. And of course, it decouples layers. When we structurized Sylius together with API Platform, we were thinking about, okay, how to do it this way that API Platform will be doing what it is best for, so infrastructure, handling of API and translating it into application, and Sylius will do its part, so handling business logic. And Messenger and command pattern is one of the best choices here. So when we have like a core of the application that we have in Sylius and the infrastructure which is handled by Webby, when something comes to us as a command, IP Platform handles that, okay? There's some request, we are creating the command, we are sending it back to you, or actually forward to you, so Sylius, let's do something about it, we do not care anymore. And this small layer in between is Symfony Messenger, which allows for really smooth integration between layers. But let's take a look how, because there were a few tweaks that we had to do it, and a few things that we learned doing this way, and that's what I would also like to share with you today. So first of all, let's take a look how the command could look like. This is almost one-to-one taken from Sylius. Like, it doesn't look exactly like this because I put a few problems there that I will try to resolve with you, but this is more or less the idea. If you would like to add something to the cart, we need product that we would like to add and the quantity of it. Then we have pretty simple class that will do it for us. We start with taking a card from the context, perhaps from some route or something like that. We need the card to put something in it. We will just create a new card item and then do some Sylius magic, so which means more or less that, okay, we are making a quantity a proper value and then adding it to the card. That being said, it's all what we need. But do you see an obvious problem with this code? I moved too quickly. One thing, though, is that we have this rule of thumb that there is only one command, one handler. And this is like always true for Sylius. And every handler is wrapped with the transaction with an validation. Therefore, every command that goes to the handler is validated with Symfony Validator. And every handler starts with the transaction and ends with the transaction. This allows us to provide you with really neat extension point that you can do whatever you want with the code or with the command before it enters handler or just after it. Because as we return the order, you can do whatever you would like to order before the transaction close. So it's always a hard point to decide where you should flush your data, because when flushing, you are closing some ways how you can change the code, especially data structure. And with this transaction middlewares, it helps us a lot to provide you another point for extension, just because you can decorate the handler and do whatever you wish with the code. But as I mentioned, it should decouple the layers. And the question is, are they separated? So here are a few hints with this code that I ask you if they are truly separated. And the problem is this line. So, of course, the first issue that we had was that for add to cart command, even though you're sending it with its body that there will be this product variant and this quantity, we still need to know about cart or object itself. Of course, pretty simple to solve. Just put also the order to the command itself. And this is how you can solve it pretty quickly. Of course, from the perspective of the handler, how to solve it from the perspective of the API user, because we would not like to tell the customer to put another data in the response, but we will go to this part later. What is important from this part is that no session or request data should be in handlers. Therefore, if we had based on the current request, current attribute, order in the handler, it actually breaks this rule. If you have the current user, currently logged in user, not in the command, but in the handler, it's also break this rule. And our rule of thumb is that there should be no session or request data in the handler itself, because you may be deferring it later. Or perhaps, which is also true in our case, you may use them also in test environment, where there is perhaps no authorized user at this particular moment, because we are just creating the environment. So remember, no session or request data in handlers and below. Therefore, as a conclusion, in the command handler, there should be all the informations that are required to perform given action. So just remember that you need all the information, but let's see if we can also make another problem. Because as we need all the information to defer execution to the later, is our code safe to defer it? And if not, what are the problems there? Here you see another issue that's pretty typical. So in commands like that, you should never put the objects directly on the command. Of course, it's pretty easy to do it and pretty straightforward with API Platform that by default is turning the IRIs into the object itself. And the commands make some sense when there's object inside. But if you put the object like this into the database with the default doctrine transport, it will just serialize object into database, and there may be some issues that are hard to spot. Therefore, the solution for it is to just have a string values and rather identifiers. In our case, it's order token and product variant code, which will allow us to just extend add to cart logic with fetching from the database. So it will take the current state of the object at the moment of calculation, not in the moment of dispatching the message. In the default approach, of course, it doesn't change too much, because the default approach in Sylius is to make it synchronous. But yet, as we are providing this possibility, we need to think about it, and this is also my recommendation. Just if you structurize your code and application with the commands, think it at the beginning of your implementation to not have to change it later. So remember, rule of thumb, commands with raw data only. And now, the question is how the API request should be structured, so where this data came from. And if we will check our documentation for add to cart operation, it's that we are taking two things in the body, so product variant code and the quantity, but the order token comes from this place. So it's actually an attribute, and by default is of course object to populate, but we do not want object to populate in our command. What is more, by default, it will not be that straightly serialized to the command itself. So it's nice that we have a product variant code below, and we can just translate this one. So at this moment, we are just taking the code into the command, but we don't want to have a token value as an object. We want to have just this token value inside of our command, because it may be deferred in the future. So the obvious answer, if you're familiar with API Platform, is to use data transformer. And of course, it will solve this problem, but every new keyword couples us with this given implementation. And this is something that probably most of you never need to thought about, because of course, I fake this data, so don't count on it. But on the other hand, if you have an application that is just serving your users, what's the problem for you to just add another argument to the command or to the class? Or what's the problem if you would just replace the class with anything else? For me, as the developer of the framework that you will be based off and the code that you have in the vendor, it's actually an important question. So I may not use too much new keywords in my code, because it will couple you with this given implementation, and therefore, if you would like to switch the command that I provide you, not only you will need to change it in the API Platform reference, but also you will need to overwrite another class. Not a big deal, but still a little less developer experience. So we come up with something that I will be calling command enrichments. And the idea is pretty simple. While data transformers transform your data into one object to another, command enrichments or data enrichments are enriching your commands with some additional information. The structure is the same as with data transformers, just we allow for more than one data transformer at the time. So the idea is to put interfaces over the commands with getters and setters structure, so we can be sure that there's some contract that we can use it. And then in pretty naive implementation, as you can see here, we are just using the interface to put data in addition to what you had before. So the customer sends us only 2 data, but we are putting the third one, as in this case, object token value. The difference, as you can see, is not that huge. Actually, this code, if you put the proper namespace, would be 100% API platform compliant. But we just put our custom interface because we wanted to use the composite pattern allow for more than one data transformer that will perform operation over your code. So there's no huge difference between data transformer and data enrichment. This is just the idea that we wanted to not only create object, but put something else there. What else can you put there? Current user. As I mentioned, with the handler, you should not have the session or just you should not call the token storage from the Symfony to fetch the currently logged in user based on the JWT token. Because if this token will not be present, it will collapse. And when it cannot be present, for example, if you defer the call or if you use it in tests. If you use the current local because the customer sends you the local header, still, if you will just fetch it in the handler itself, you are coupling into the current request. Same with the current channel, which is how we different from where the request came from. So based on the hostname, we're able to determine the current channel. And this is something that if we'll use it in the handler itself, will be coupled to the request itself. And of course, the current order, as you could see on the example. And another thing that you can spot here on this list is that in each case is current, which means that we are basing we do not want to base our handler logic on what is happening at this particular moment of time. So we're moving to the rule of thumb, no session requests data in handlers at all. Enrichments are perhaps something that violates some rules of the command, how the command should be created, because by default, by design, they should be immutable data with only read-only properties, and we're adding something after the creation. We have setter and getter, but it just provides better extendibility of the framework for you. So if you would have the command that will be shop user aware, you don't need to think how we'll manage to put it on your command. You just need to think that, okay, I need to put this interface and I will have it on my command so I can perform operation based on the currently logged in user at the moment of command dispatch. And this is just how we thought that it would be much more convenient for you to work with it. And in our case, interfaces are just the contracts. So that's why we structure it also this way. So we put the interface and you can expect that it will work. And also we have something to work on, not only to put expectation over what data you put into your commands. What are the cons of this solution? Like all the command approach. Of course, it's much more complicated than the CRUD operation, and it has steeper learning curve. So it requires a little bit more knowledge to actually use it and understand it. So that's the con, and that's why it's also a lot of boilerplate for the simple operation. That's why I would not recommend it to do it all the way, especially for typical CRUD operation, because it's harder to extend this approach. It's harder to change it than the CRUD operation. But in contradiction, it gives you great flexibility in the handlers itself. If you would like to trigger an email, perhaps inform other system, etc., I find it much more convenient to do it with command and handlers instead of like with the regular CRUD operation. Still, everything is a trade-off, so I just wanted to give you another perspective. And as we talk about API architecture, let's take a look in API design. What you already hear today, it's how we should think about modeling our data and how we should model data. So in today's presentation, there were mentions that, for example, IRI or just URLs usage should be taken to another level to be able to take advantage of ASA, if I recall correctly the name, etc. So if you have small chunks of data, it's much easier to store it, cache it somewhere in the middle. But also from our perspective, it makes us better framework because then you can decide if you would like to put more data. By default, we are just showing the connection. And this is sample object that you can receive from Sylius, and you can see already that we are using IRI here, here. Also the ID of the object. So what we are telling that the identifier of this object is IRI, like JSON LD plus Hydra in this particular example. But when you are taking a look into the command itself, we are expecting order product variant code and quantity. And there is this change or this dichotomy that, okay, we are talking about IRR usage, but we are expecting code in some places, how you should know where to use what. Of course, you have the name, but it makes somehow it not clear, or like we're using different approaches in different places. And actually, if we could unify some usage, it would be awesome. So first of all, the problem is that here we are expecting code, and that's obvious that you should put the code, but why put the code if you should reference everything with IRIs? So to do something like that, it's pretty simple. I assume that today there was the speech about the Symfony serializer, and the case like that was already covered. So we just put the product variant code as an attribute over the comment, but show to the customer that, okay, we are expecting product variant. Yet there's another problem that it's still left. So we are putting IRI, but we are expecting just identifier. So we develop also a small layer that integrates to API platform that instead of fetching objects from the database directly, we are just matching it to the routes and putting every IRI that will be placed on over the comment with this interface will be translated to the identifier only. So this is the way how we solve it. Perhaps it will be useful for you, because there is no point in fetching object from the database if we will not use it right now, just to translate it to the code and then dispatch it on the messenger and then fetch it again. So we decided that this approach will be much better and easier. Another thing that I would like to mention when we are talking about API design is database should not force you to force your API design. Database records are not your resources. And there are like different things, and from the API perspective, you should think how the customer will consume your API, and from the application level first, you should think how the code should behave, and then how the data should be structured, perhaps. So there are like different concerns, and we should think about them in different ways at different moment of time, not couple everything together. And as an example of this approach, I wanted to mention about reset password feature, which all of us know. So usually we have some password that is held and hashed on the object of the user, but how to perform reset password operation. And we decide that it will be just from the perspective of the API user, different resource. So we have request of password reset, and the first one will send you a link, so actually some token that you can identify that, okay, this is still I'm still allowed to make a password reset. And from the configuration point of view that you may be familiar with, we create two commands with post and patch operation. So first of all, you are creating the request, then you are performing it. They're translated into two different commands. So from our perspective, we are still using a command pattern, but from the perspective of the API design, it's just a post and patch operation, even though there is no such thing like password request, reset password request resource inside of our code base. There is no such table, there is no such object, etc. We're just translating one way to another, because we should think about this thing, about API design and design of the application in slight separation. So to not force us to do some stuff just because we have it already somewhere. And the last topic that I promised you that I will cover is the testing architecture. So I just made this name up, but if you heard about us or see the Sylius somewhere, we are just BDD warriors. We want to do BDD all the stuff, always, etc. And even for some period of time, I have seen that the point was to use a BDD or Big Hat also for the testing of API platform. And I just wanted to also bring you how it works with us. So first of all, when we start to develop integration between API platform and Sylius, we had 1,500 scenarios and over the 17,000 steps that was performed. So every time you wanted to change something in Sylius, this amount of steps was performed with Behead. Right now, just to comparison, we have almost 2,000 scenarios and 22,000 steps, so just to let you know. But it's not the talk about BDD and Sylius. It's about how we test, or actually about our integration, and in this particular area, how we test our integration. So before I will jump into the details, because not all of you may be familiar with Behead itself, Behead is for business-oriented scenarios, so scenarios that are focused on the behavior of the customer, written in the Gherkin notation, and this looks more or less like this. So at the top of the file, you see that I have some feature, there is some short description, what I'm expecting to achieve with that, and then you have a background with given, which is just an arrangement of the test, so there is some data in the database or whatever, and when I perform some operation, then I expect some results. And the important factor, if you are doing some BDD, is that this should be written more or less like this. So it should be oriented over the behavior of the customer, not over the clicking or sending the requests. So it's the main approach or the main idea behind BDD is to have a conversation with the business, how it should behave. So if I'm adding this product, what should I result depending on what I already had in the database. So for example, there is a promotion, how my card should behave. If there is another promotion, if there are two promotions, how they should be calculated, etc. So BDD is about conversation, not about testing itself. But it also provides abstraction layer over the implementation. And this is the feature that we used mostly. So in our case, how we start to test our infrastructure, we start with the scenario, and this is the real one from the Sylius, and we added another tag. So previously you had a customer login, which was just a grouping tag for more of the features like this. And then we have two tags, one with UI, one with API. And in both cases, it has exactly the same background, so the same data will be stored in the database. But first, we'll take into account the UI approach. So we'll load the data to the database. Then we'll perform the operation that is like exactly clicking on the website, HTML-based website, and we'll perform assertion over HTML. And then we'll do exactly the same, so exactly the same data, but this time in the context of API, which means that we will be doing API calls instead. It means that we have one description of the feature, yet two different implementation. From the business perspective, nothing changed. We just changed the infrastructure. From developer perspective, whole world changed because we are doing it totally new way. Yet it provided us also with the way how we can calculate the migration process. Right now we reach over the 80% of the features that we provide with the shop. Just because we can right now calculate the tag, okay, this feature is, because each feature has its own actor, so it is usually administrator, visitor, or shop user. And based on that, usually we have different tags. Based on this tag, we can just calculate in which area the feature is like assigned. Is it admin or is it shop? And also how much UI and how many API tags we have. In this case, it's worth noticing that not everything can be mapped like this. And also we made some mistakes and some features are coupled to the UI. Therefore, there's additional no API tag, but this is the way how you can migrate your application, especially if you're working like I am with 5 years old code base right now, because this is when the Sylius started, and yet we were able to migrate the business features exactly thanks to Behead notation. So we use the Behead as a migration tool, and it worked pretty well. Let me know if you would like to hear a little bit more about it. But what are the cons of this solution? Of course, this is another implementation overhead. So not only you need to think about the structure of your request, but also you need to think about how to describe them just in plain English. You have another tool that you need to learn and you need syntax to be familiar with. And also, if you are testing like that, usually you do not see the whole responses in one place, especially for the assertion, because mostly what we did was just to decode JSON to some array and check for the proper keys and proper values. So how to keep contracts of your API and design your APIs itself. And for that, I would recommend using PHP unit, where the whole response is visible. So as you've seen already, this is from from this tool, I took this response that is pretty readable for me. Okay, what I have here, what are the details that I can expect? And it's important that this test will fail if anything will be added or removed. So we do not only want to keep the contract because nothing was removed and we didn't break any API in the future, but we also want to know if due to some misconfiguration, any new field was added. It's okay to add it to the test and then the test will pass, but we would like to be as soon as possible informed that, okay, we just exposed a new stuff there. Of course, these tests are super easy to set up. We were using our own library, API test case, but you have the same, pretty similar tooling built in API platform, and I totally recommend to use it. But another thing that I would like to move with this topic, we are just using it for the simplified test only. So mostly we're just doing one API call. The whole structure of the test is set up with just arrangement in the database and then some commands that can like move with some operations, like putting something to the cart and addressing. This we are doing with the commands. And then just one call and assertion, no business flow checks, because we have Behead, like a tool for the conversation for that. So these two tools can work together. With the Behead, you should be focused on the business expectation, what you should implement, and with the PHP unit, how you should design your APIs or what is the current contract that you have with your users. The test like this works pretty simple for those who are not familiar with the PHP unit. So we are loading the data, making the request to the customer, fetching the response, and asserting to the file, which is like exactly what you can see here. We also use some PHP matcher, which I totally recommend because it's useful for the place like ID. But yeah, up to you. The tooling is great, also in API platform, so just use it. What are the cons of this solution? Of course, it's only for developers. This is not the tool that you will probably bring to your stakeholders, project manager, etc., and make a conversation how the app behaves in the long time. So just to sum up, I hope that you enjoy and learn something, or at least I put you in this new position about thinking how you can structurize application that you integrate with API platform. Perhaps you have different approach and you have different experience, so that's why I would like to trigger some conversation either during the questions or after it. We are at the end of the integration, and I truly believe that together with API platform, Sylius can bring a new quality to e-commerce itself. It will be much easier to develop something from the backend and frontend. And also it's like the success story for the whole Symfony ecosystem, like because we were able to integrate both applications just because we follow the best practices of the framework that we build on, and we just believe in the code quality and the extendibility as the core features of our framework. And also open source, like without it, we wouldn't be here. If you would like to test it, there is a whole documentation available for you, of course, generated by API platforms. So therefore, you can just click it, you check it out how it behaves. It's available behind this URL if you would like. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Maybe online, Grégoire? Do you see any questions online?
There are some questions from Reza. What is the Sylius approach for real-time events such as logistics behind e-commerce?
So I assume that it's not the real-time events from the customer perspective or behavior, but rather the integration with external systems, which is like the main topic. And by default, we just have the values that we are storing, and the recommendation will be to synchronize it. But once we move into the command pattern, we could just listen to some queue or somewhere else where the Sylius could be informed about the changes, and that would be solution probably for lifetime updates if they are needed. In the simplest case, and this is how it's solved in most cases, we're just recommending making synchronization one over the time and just hoping that it will not, like, Sylius will have enough items to sell and it will not oversell, but it depends on your requirements.
Thank you. Are there any questions on site here? Yes, one question.
Hello. Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, we're currently using Sylius at our company, and was wondering how heavy the transition from 1.8 to 1.9 with API platform would be. How difficult the migration is going to be. We haven't had the time to look at it yet, but we're going to have to do it at some point. And wondering if there's not much breaking, in terms of tests and everything else.
So we started to develop this integration like a year ago and a few months. So it's already third version that we are still on the experimental part. We try to document all the stuff, like from the 1.8, there was not too much documentation in it, but from 1.8, we start to document all the breaking changes in separate upgrade files. Of course, there are like 20 items that you can, some interfaces were changed, some the responses were changed, and we try to make a diff of each of them. So if you're start to develop API platform right now, we are trying to provide you like upgrade files. Okay, this is the changes that we made, and hopefully it will not be a huge change, but it's still experimental feature. So yeah, we like totally changed the serialization group at some moment. It's not the huge deal, in my opinion, at this moment, but yeah, it happened, and you need to just follow what were the changes. And the problem is that we already had admin API and shop API plugin, which may be also what you are referencing to. And in this case, admin API is not yet in the preparation, but for the shop API, we are planning to make some migration tool, or perhaps not the tool, but at least the guide. So these are the concerns that you should take into account. This is what you can work with. From my perspective, I can only say that if you wish to migrate from shop API plugin into this new integration, because we are doing it almost the same way from the command perspective plus from the data structures, you can just plug in new version and just migrate it path by path or just road by road. So you can just start the checkout in one API and finish it with the other, and that will be like allow you to keep your old implementations in the same place, still take advantage of the new approach that we are providing. So I hope that it answers you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, we don't have more time for questions. Don't hesitate online to ask your questions on Livestorm. Maybe Łukasz will be able to answer them directly on Livestorm. And on site, if you have more questions for Łukasz, I invite you to ask him at the next break. Now we're gonna welcome François Zaninotto, who will teach us how to become a React admin Grandmaster in only 237 steps. And in the French track, they're gonna be Marion, who gonna teach us API and client unified permission management.